Hey everyone, how are we doing? Let's go to Roy Peace first. Peace, how are you doing today?
Doing well, trying to rest up from a long day of volunteering yesterday. So just hanging out now, hanging out with you guys.
Awesome.
uh,
Is there any org you want to plug that you're volunteering with? Someone we should,
so
donate
yesterday,
our
yeah, we
time
were,
or efforts or
yesterday we were out with the Del Valley Community Coalition again, giving out water, food, PPE. And then after that, I went with my other group, Austin Atheists Helping the Homeless, and we
Mhm.
bagged a bunch of like food and supplies for the homeless. Those folks will be delivering it today. So we do that once a month. So it happened to be like a double header yesterday.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
awesome. How about you, Susie? How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm so glad that you did double duty today because that means that I can relax. You can have.
Mm.
Got you covered.
Yeah, no, nothing's been going on here. Just I actually thought for a minute I was sick the other day, but it was just a low fever and I'm fine now. So either that or I got a COVID.
Mhm.
Like,
Good to hear. Dr. Roy War, how are you?
uh yeah, so my thing is I had been experimenting with raising plants that aren't native to Texas but are like Mexico, or they're from
Mm.
South Texas, because the stuff that's from the Austin area was starting to get, I think, hammered too much by the drought that we've been experiencing. So,
Mm.
from 2000, 2015, or 13, somewhere in there, we had a really nasty drought. And then it went away a little bit, but it came back last year. Um, and now I'm discovering that those Southern Texas and Mexican plants ain't going to make it.
Wow, that's crazy.
Well, that 5 or 3 degrees, however far it finally dipped,
Uh,
wiped out a bunch of that stuff.
Yeah.
So what I need now is plants that can survive 3 to 115 degrees. And I'm
so climate change will hit the gardeners first, right?
yes,
Yeah.
apparently. And so the type of plants that'll grow here now has shrunk.
Mm.
There's
I hear
native
you,
stuff
man.
that
I
won't
hear
make
you.
it.
I hear you.
do you
I
think
hear, we're
that
going to
this?
have a discussion on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
hear you.
I actually am really interested in that. Like,
Yeah.
what
I
does
love
happen?
plants.
Well, so one of the things was the Monterey oak, right? Because the Monterey oak basically was growing like weeds in my yard. Like I was having to ask questions like, which do I pull these up? What do I do?
Mm.
And now I think they're dead. I think
Mm,
they're just wiped out. So
yeah.
Well,
I
that
was
answers
thinking
your
they were a
question.
replacement for the native stuff, but they're no.
What do you call it? Solarizing. It was like a winterizing instead of a solarizing situation. Just killed everything.
It just killed everything. Start
Everything.
over.
Yeah. That's like my ghost plants. I started with like five little plants and then, just pull the seeds off and it gets more and more and more and more. But I have them around this one area in my yard and they're all just burned. I'm like, oh no. And that's like the first plant I really started with was those. And that just kind of sprung
Oh,
off
Oh.
to do a ton of other things. And yeah,
that's
it's kind of sad.
depressing. I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Dr. Benefsha. How are we
Hey,
doing?
I'm doing good. I slept almost 10 hours last night. That was awesome. I
Yay!
know. We have a deadline for something that we're turning in. I was thinking I'm gonna wake up at 5 a.m. I'm gonna do this. I was like, nah. It felt so good. And then I woke up to two pieces of news. One of them was super, super happy. There's this political prisoner. Um, she was she has dual citizenship, Iranian and UK citizenship. Nazanin Zaghari, I think her husband's name is Ratcliffe. Anyway, she had gone to Iran about 5 years ago, doing just community work and possibly research. I'm not quite clear exactly what she was doing. and the regime kind of took her, and she's been under house arrest for most of that time, with an ankle bracelet, confined to a house. She and her family, her children, her husband are back in the UK. And today, news got out, or was it last night, whenever that was, that the ankle bracelets have been taken off, but then, and that she's free, but that she is having a new, I think she's going back to court again, either this Sunday or today or the next day. Anyway, and I just hope she can get the hell out somehow. Somehow, I don't know how.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's some kind of movement. So that made me happy. And then I just, the other piece of news that I read was that in San Antonio, I don't know this person, but a member of the Muslim community in San Antonio, a pulmonary specialist and a doctor, passed away after fighting since August. He was a frontline COVID worker and just 61 years old. And he is just basically like day and night working. And he lost the battle, which made me think of some data that I'd like to share. First of all, 1/3 of all MDs in the US, this was news that I heard like 2-3 days ago on NPR. 1/3 of all MDs in the US are immigrant Black and brown folks.
Wow.
Y'all, that
Versus
was
how much
insane.
percent of the population is immigrant Black and brown?
I don't know what percentage.
It's probably about 8 or so, maybe, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's insane. That's
It is.
That's crazy.
And we're doing
Awesome.
everything we can to discourage that. I mean, I don't know now. We're, like we were trying, when Trump was president, he was trying to shut that down.
Absolutely.
Like any immigration. And it's like, but they stay.
Well, here's the other thing. One other piece of data was that Muslims are around 1% of the population, but they are, what was the other number? 15% of the MDs. That's another, that's a crazy ass number right there.
Yeah.
And all the rednecks are going in.
I remember when the Muslim ban came out, there was this meme going around saying, some Bubba is saying, well, you're taking away my job. And the comeback was, yeah, Bubba, you're going to be that next brain surgeon or something.
I remember those.
Yeah, they took that
Speak with a white doctor
spot away from you.
That's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
Exactly. Where were you? You didn't need, no, you're dead on with that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways in which we keep this sort of population of people who are ready, trained, and able to immigrate over and do our high skilled labor is through destabilizing these countries, right? Over the course of decades. So let's talk a little bit more about that today. How has the CIA, other arms of this government that we live in, pay taxes to, contribute towards all of this society of ours? How do we contribute to these destabilizations across the globe?
I love that segue,
Roy War, take us to the war.
Nice. Classic.
Very nice.
So, I mean, the thing that immediately comes to mind too is, for those of you who think maybe this is past, Biden has already announced that he thinks that Juan Guaido is the legitimate president of Venezuela. And of course, the United States is still interfering in Haiti's affairs. So, there was an attempted coup last month, but interestingly enough, the attempted coup in Haiti was against the pro-US, the US-backed president of Haiti, and he survived the coup. So we have a really intense history of overthrows. The way we've done them has shifted.
Intense history of imperialism.
Well, actually, that begs another question, which we should also address real quick. U.S. does imperialism differently than European states did imperialism. So, Great Britain would go in, they would plant the flag on the ground, and then that country would go, wait a minute, what's that? And then Great Britain would go, oh, we just won. And then that country would go, wait a minute, you mean if we had taken a flag and planted it in your soil, we'd own you? And then Brits would be like, yeah, you were slow, and that's how we took you over. And then
do we just go and plant a McDonald's instead? Is that how we
so basically we put golden arches on, and that's why we own you now.
Basically.
So
we own all of Europe then.
Yeah.
This is why like every
the
few
Gulf
years,
states.
when there would be protests, anti-American sentiment or whatever in Pakistan, they'd go to the KFC to protest there.
That's hilarious.
And from an American perspective, it wouldn't make sense, but from there, right, that is the symbol. That is where you go. That's the more so than the embassy, it's the KFC.
That's awesome.
Right?
But that's exactly right? Because it's all business driven.
I remember
corporate.
When I was a kid, there was all of a sudden, anyway, I don't want to get into the politics, but there was this guy called Rafsanjani. He passed recently, the last 4, 5, 6 years. I don't even know. And he was super, super powerful. There was this rumor that he was going to set up a McDonald's in Tehran. We never figured out if this was real or not. But around 7 or 8 o'clock, everybody all the kids, all the high school kids, we were like, we're going there. They said we all marched there. There was, I cannot tell you how many thousands of people were there. And whether true or not, we shut the idea down.
Nice.
Awesome.
March on McDonald's.
Yeah,
march on the imaginary McDonald's.
Imaginary. I love that.
Nice.
Never was.
They showed up. I remember when I was living in Paris and they opened the one on the Champs-Elysees, and I was just devastated. And I found out that in Florence, the city of Florence sold property to McDonald's, and the citizens didn't know, and they were protesting and all kinds of stuff. And guess what? McDonald's is now in the Plaza Santa Croce. So you could just go there, look at the David, look at Dante, and grab a Big Mac.
It's like the domain deal that was done here in Austin by Mayor Will.
Yes.
Yeah, where he made a backroom deal in a smoke-filled room with all these corporations. I will create a tax-free zone for you. And when Austin voters found out, we actually put a proposition on the ballot to revoke the tax-free zone. And it lost by like 30 votes, something like that.
Oh, wow.
In part, probably because of the phrasing, because you needed to vote yes to get rid of the taxes.
I remember that. Oh,
yeah, and I think a lot of
did
people
that on purpose.
And then Will Wynn and all his corrupt developer friends put up billboards everywhere that was "Keep Austin honest," and it was like, I didn't make that deal, you did.
Yep.
Austin dishonest.
Let's keep an eye out for what happens with this new hotel that they've put up and just handed
Here it comes.
fucking Jimmy Flanagan. They call that man bankrupt. What do they call him? The bankrupt bully, because he's such an asshole. I'm done.
So on another note, every Hajj season, Hajj is the excuse me, the pilgrimage that Muslims are obliged to take if they have the means to, at least once in their lives, and it's to Mecca. So it's the Kaaba where, there's all that history. So every Hajj season, there's this meme, there's new versions of this meme that come out where, it's the Kaaba, which is a enshrouded black sort of cube, right? And it's purported to have been initially built by Abraham and all of that. Anyway, it's got this very long history, this Abrahamic history. Excuse me. And at the same time, you see this insane buildup, like of buildings and skyscrapers, and there is literally a mall with a Starbucks and McDonald's and Zara's and you name it, every possible
American corporation,
multinational or American corporation that you can think of. And it just, the soullessness of this what is supposed to be a spiritual pilgrimage journey, and the ties that this, how it's been sullied by capitalism and things. Yes. So American presence, absolutely.
Roy War, what is the like archetypical case of the CIA going in and intervening in a country?
Actually,
what does that look like? How does it happen?
Well, before we do that, what I want to do is I want to sort of lay the foundation for why the United States does imperialism differently.
So who does it normally?
So the way the French or the British or the Germans, for that matter, the Italians did it was they would go in and they would conquer and they would take over the land and they would rule it directly. So, for example, in 1882, the British invaded Egypt. Now they left the monarchy in place. In fact, they made the Khadawi change his title to king so that it would sound like it fit more into the European model. So that in effect, the King of England becomes then the emperor of the British Empire, and then the King of Egypt is subordinate to him. Or you would just outright take over the place. And then, or some combination, like with India, some places were outright annexed to the British Empire, and some places were still ruled by local authorities, but they were still under British rule. Like, you know, so but nonetheless, there are soldiers on the ground permanently. There's a permanent military base. There's just a permanent presence with the flag flying. What happened was the United States, I think, because it felt like it would play catch up, right? There was no way to really get in because the British had already carved a huge chunk of Africa up. The British already had a big chunk of Asia. The French had a big chunk of Asia. Like, where would you go? So I think what the United States decided, and also 19th century United States didn't have the military might to really pull off too much. The United States decided to take a very different approach, which was invade the country, sure, overthrow its government, and then pull out, leaving the puppet government behind. And then you're not only not wasting money on a permanent military presence, but as long as that puppet government survives, you're basically getting whatever you wanted for free, right? Because that puppet government knows it survives only because it continues to allow your businesses to operate and plunder the place. And we did this to Latin America on a massive scale. We invaded Honduras 8 times, Nicaragua 7 times. Every time they would get in a leader that would change the price of bananas, we'd go in there and shoot the place up. And of course, that's where we get the term banana republic from, right? That was a uniquely US construct. With China, we created the open door policy. And the idea was that European states would not, and Japan, would not carve China up into little spheres, but rather all of China would be open to all businesses. And so it would become sort of a free market enterprise, not truly free, obviously, but we like to pretend. And then that way, you know, the US could trade anywhere. There wouldn't be these zones. And that actually became more or less the dominant model in China. And it was more or less successful. I mean, the United States and the European powers invaded China multiple times. We'd send gunboats up rivers and shoot various places up just to make sure we got our business policies in place. Obviously, there's the Opium Wars, right? The Boxer Rebellion, lots of military intervention. But it became sort of the dominant system that the United States took around the world. World War II happens. We need to pretend we're the good guys. So we need to shift policy. And it's not that we're never going to send the Marines into a place to shoot it up. It's that we become more reluctant to send in the Marines and shoot up a place. So we do Guatemala in 54, we do Lebanon in 58. It's not that we're not sending in the Marines anymore. And obviously we do Vietnam and Iraq. It's just, if we can, we'd rather use the CIA to do it. And
Okay,
so that's why the CIA plays the major role that it does, beginning with its creation in 47.
47. Okay.
All right. So how does it get started, and why is 47 the year? What else was going on at this time period?
So the U.S. prior to the CIA had a thing called the OSS, and the OSS was created specifically just for World War II. It existed almost completely within the framework of the time period that the U.S. was involved in World War II. And the Office of Strategic, I forgot what it stands for. The whole idea was it was our intelligence agency.
Service.
Is that what it was? Okay.
I think so.
Strategic services, yeah.
Yeah. And the whole idea was we would go in there and we could do some spying. Some of it was aerial, like for example, we'd send airplanes over and we would photograph stuff, and then the OSS would figure out what it was based on what they knew for their operatives on the ground. And the idea was that when we did invasions, airborne drops, whatever we're doing, we would know who to contact to get support from the locals. As a general rule, it was a pretty benign organization as far as war goes. And we ended it with the end of World War II. In the 40s, in the late 40s, some business leaders, some Yale graduates, which is just such a weirdly specific group of people, and former members of the OSS created the CIA, and then basically went to the federal government and said, look, we have an organization. What's at stake here is, do you want to have a say in what we do? And if you do, you need to fund us. And if you don't, we'll just go rogue and do our own thing and serve our business.
Whoever pays us. Serve whoever pays us.
Basically.
I mean, it sounds like they would have either sold us out to another country if they could have, or work for us. I mean, that seems to be the differentiation I'm getting here.
And to be clear, they never worked for us. The CIA never served the United States. What it serves is businesses. So the number one thing the CIA does and has done throughout its entire existence is not actually overthrowing governments. It's actually been corporate espionage.
Yeah.
Yeah. What the CIA has primarily done is it steals secrets from French companies and British companies and German companies and brings them to the United States, and then hands it over to US companies. But then,
so that was that Hoover who started it, or Truman? Who was that who actually started?
Well, Truman was the president at the time. Yes.
Okay.
And he's the first president to use the CIA in this nefarious way.
What did he do?
In many ways, what happened in 1949 in Syria is sort of the CIA's test case. Miles Copeland, the musician, was a CIA operative. By his own account, he was an Arabophile. He actually really loved Arab culture, and his friend Kermit Roosevelt,
an Orientalist.
The cover.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Is that really what it's called?
Arabophile?
No. Ramesh, you said Orientalist?
Oh, he was totally an Orientalist. There's no doubt. So an Orientalist.
Yeah.
Actually, Ramesh, why don't you define?
Yeah, please do. I'm very curious.
Yeah, so it's one thing to like love the Arab world or an Eastern culture, Eastern with proximity to Europe, in an authentic kind of way where you're immersed in it, where you understand it, its contours, its contradictions, all that good stuff. It's another thing to like project an image onto it. This image maybe of like harems and luxury and all this beautiful stuff. And to have, this a fetishized image of this culture that doesn't actually exist in real life, but exists sort of in your mind in this temporally weird space as well, right? Neither in the 12th century nor in the 19th century does it look any different. History doesn't happen here. Yeah, all sorts of strangeness.
Okay.
Yeah. So was he actually an Arabophile or was he an Orientalist?
And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it also has a bunch of nostalgia with it, which is this is the old ways of being, and we miss it. It has no place in modern life anymore, but it reminds of us of the good
yeah.
Men can have many wives. They can keep them, sequestered. They can, children are in their place.
It's not that different here, I don't think.
But hey, where we heard this before just recently? Make America Great Again.
Yeah, so lots of nostalgia, and there's justification to go in there, have these sort of warm feelings towards these peoples and their ways of being, but also, it's okay to exploit them because at the same time they must catch up, and we are fatherly, paternal towards them, and we want to teach them the new ways.
That's exactly what we are. We are paternal. If we were maternal,
whenever
everything would be different.
Whenever you see a white or European person with good, kindly intentions towards Arab folks or whatever, think about Orientalism. That should go off in your head.
Yes, for sure. And one of the consequences of this romanticized thing of the past has been like the romanticization of the Bedouin. That the Bedouin are the ultimate Arabs. That they live in the desert. They're not corrupted by the city life, by urban life. And like if you read John Bagot Glub Basha's books on the Arabs, it's clear he's totally enraptured with this notion of the pure Arab being the Bedouin.
As opposed to the thinker, the scientist, the philosopher, the person who created the first this and that. No, no. Yeah. The horse riding, living in the desert.
That's the real thing.
That's
horse riding is for people who know anything about Arabs, but most people are going to invoke camels because they don't know anything about Arabs. And then they're going to invoke the wrong camel, and they're going to put 2 hump camels out there, and it's going to drive me bonkers.
Do you remember when George Bush said something about his missiles that could hit a camel in the ass? I was like, what is that? Why would you say that? It makes no sense.
Who's the guy who wrote the Arab hater, the historian?
Oh, yes. I know.
There's an Arab hater who's a historian.
Are you kidding? Almost all historians are Arab haters.
In fact, he was the number one scholar that the Republicans, at least pre-Trump era, would go to.
Can't think of his name.
Arg.
Anyway, so
I'm gonna look.
Is this our civilizational conflict, dude?
Yes.
Oh my god, it's on this.
Huntington?
No, Huntington
is Gorka, is it?
We're talking about the English guy.
I can't remember now.
He's English, or he's
he talks a British guy, but he is the cornerstone of the work of people like Huntington and all that.
Right. Okay, so
I'm gonna look.
I'm just gonna keep going because I don't want to waste time. So he writes Saura, which is the word for revolution. He goes Saura, which literally means to rise up, as in a camel rising up. Why are you invoking the imagery of a camel when you're talking about revolution?
That's Bernard Lewis.
That's it. Bernard Lewis.
I like the way you leaned in like I did with Jimmy Flanagan.
We're going to slowly find everyone's little trigger points and people here.
I think Roy Woody has one. No trigger points. He's good with everything. Except maybe the $1,400. So
the point of bringing up the Bernard Lewis.
Don't say it, Susie.
Except the $1,400. It's true.
$1,400 instead of
$1,400. It's $2,000.
It is. You already got $600.
No. They ran on 2,000.
Not what they said.
They did. And they kept saying, and you've already got 600.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But let's move on.
So we were talking.
Tell me back. Camels are rising.
Right.
I see hookah
Get back to
lamps
the
in the
camel.
background.
Use of
Yeah.
language. We've talked about this before, how language is used in particular ways to make the stuff you want to say between the lines pop out. Okay.
And you know, you're talking about revolution, you're talking about one of the ultimate ways in which people can express themselves politically. And so you're talking about the Arabic word for it, so you need to invoke camels. Like, it's complete non sequitur, but that's it. That's what you're gonna do.
Also dehumanizing, right? This is camel standing in for an entire like population, for people, for communities, for societies, for histories, all of this. A camel is taking that place.
And you know, the majority of people in the Middle East don't live in the desert. They live in a chunk of land that's totally arable, hence the large population, right?
The extensive, many-folded civilization pieces of the Islamic world, civilizations in the Islamic world.
Big long rivers.
No, but like this, the focus is the point, right? The focus.
So it's not people in a tent somewhere, is right? I think when I hear camel
on civilization is on the lack of civilization. It is focused on how civilization began and ended with white folks, as opposed to all the majority of everyone else. And the myth that it started with Greece, and that Greece was by itself isolated from all the folks around it
who were barbarians.
and white. Apparently Greeks were all white,
but they weren't. But by the way, they weren't.
No, they weren't.
And even in the 19th century, Europeans were still not sure that Greeks were white.
Yeah, but it's the myth making, right?
Yeah.
So much so that when Greeks came here, people were like, wait a minute, these people are like Italians, and they're white N-words, and what's going on? And like, you know.
yeah
Ooh, there's a lot of manipulation of information and building the imaginary that goes on. I
don't think we would have crawled out of that primordial soup in that area if it were not sustainable. I mean, right?
And the CIA, back to the CIA, they engage in this myth making as well, right? They're very invested in the kinds of stories we tell. They fund our major Hollywood productions every year to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Actually, very strange.
They used the CIA.
Why are they? Yeah.
They used. The CIA used Hollywood for a lot of stuff, I think. You put that in past tense. It's continuous. It's happening today. It'll happen a year from now, 2 years from now as well.
Didn't the CIA, I read this recently, the CIA has actually played a major role in promoting the Marvel movies.
Yes, I heard something like that.
Too.
Yes,
yeah.
You're right.
And
right, because have this international world in the market.
We went on air that the CIA got involved in academia and promoting Michel Foucault.
Yes.
Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, so there was this point in like intellectual history, right, where you had thinkers on both the right and the left. You had this political environment where communism was a big global threat to this country, to the business interests. The CIA represented all of this good stuff, and you needed to have some place for these damn leftist academics in their universities teaching these radical ideas to their kids or whatever the hell, to think about and to have a position on the left that was not a communist or a Marxist position. And so you find this cool radical French thinker and prop him up a little bit more than the other folks, and you make this an acceptable leftist position to hold and to have. And so you had the CIA who was actively involved in changing the conversation around this intellectual tradition, which isn't a drag on Foucault. We still love Foucault and all this stuff, and he's still useful. But it's very interesting that they're inserting themselves into the cultural conversation at both this like intellectual level, at the pop level when it comes to Hollywood as well, in addition to doing like direct action and intervention in countries internationally.
Well, that's one good thing the CIA did, because I gotta say Foucault is fabulous.
Yeah.
He is fabulous.
I love Foucault, but I was very shocked to learn about
Well, they screwed up there, I gotta tell you.
So one of the things that's worth pointing out is the CIA itself is also has drunk the Kool-Aid. Like, they believe the myth they're promoting. It's not just simply like there's these cynical guys who are like, what myth can we create? So, for example, Miles Copeland, the guy who does the 1949 overthrow of the Syrian government. For the record, Syria came out of World War II as a democracy. It left the French Empire as a democracy. It had a free and fair election. Al-Qawatli was elected to be its first leader, and we decide 2 years later we don't like him. We don't want him there. I actually kind of think Truman probably didn't actually care. It was more like, let's do a test run on a state we don't care about that won't have particularly dangerous implications. And so Miles Copeland does this overthrow, and he's successful. Syria ends up in disaster land. So, you're a brand new fledgling democracy. You've been at it for 2 years, and your government goes down in a CIA coup. What ends up happening is, over the course of the next 9 years, over the course of the next 9 years, Syria ends up with like 10 or 11 different heads of state. Because it's just having coup after coup after coup. And so no government can last 12 months, and it collapses and there's a new government. And finally, Al-Qawatli himself comes back. He becomes the leader a second time. And he ends up going to Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, and says, look, we're done. Syria's finished. What's going to happen is the communists are going to take over. We know you're anti-communist. What we propose is we merge, and you become the president of Syria. And so Egypt and Syria in 1958 merge to try to recover from the 1949 coup. And so, it turns out there is this very severe consequence when these things happen. Patrice Lumumba in Democratic Republic of Congo, we murder him, and we replace him with a guy named Mobutu Sese Seko, who ends up being the tyrant, cruel, sadistic leader of newly renamed Democratic Republic of Congo, becomes Zaire. And, it's 30 years of underdeveloping Zaire. Instead of Zaire is one of the most mineral wealthy countries on the planet. And instead of it
so
becoming wealthy, it became poor.
Why is it that, why is it that, you have this, like tell me more about the global context taking place here, right? You have this series of like newly independent states who are freed from direct colonization, freed from direct imperialism, and are starting to articulate their own sovereignty in a particular kind of way. They're starting to have control over their own resources, have state companies replace the other companies that were extracting resources from their territories or land or whatever, and then use them towards building an actual state in the third world. Why is this why the CIA really wanted to intervene here? Was there, what else was going on?
The CIA ran into a really interesting situation. So Truman's whole doctrine was, we need to fight communism no matter what, everywhere we can. Eisenhower came along and he said, no, our real goal is to disassemble the British and French empires and then replace them. We need to destroy our allies. So we're going to look them in the face while we're shaking their hand and stabbing a knife into their gut. And then we need to replace those empires. So as states like Syria and Democratic Republic of Congo break away from their old imperial masters, we need to become the new masters, but in the American style. We're going to send multinational corporations and then plunder and loot the place. The problem was, and this is the irony of all of this, after World War II, Europe goes socialist, right? They create the welfare state. I mean, it's socialist capitalist hybrid. I think people get confused there, but just so we're clear, the public had a fair amount of socialism, including some states issuing a check every month to everybody so that you could have just a basic living income. So our allies in this, Western and Central Europe, Italy and Germany and the Netherlands, are themselves experimenting with the socialism that we've decided is evil. And honestly, the United States was never really threatened by communism because the idea of communism spreading across the world was pretty preposterous. In retrospect, right? I have no doubt that the actors at the time believed it would spread, more than it ended up doing. But in retrospect, when we look back, we realize communism just wasn't the big threat. The real threat the United States was facing was this European style socialist capitalist hybrid system. And so on the one hand, our allies are doing exactly the worst thing imaginable for us, but we're destroying them and tearing apart their empires and trying to replace them. And those former colonies are inspired by the European states that have broken away from and want to imitate that model. People like Patrice Lumumba and Gamal Abdel Nasser want to do this sort of they want to do this sort of European style socialist capitalist hybrid system. So we need to nip that in the butt because we can't allow people like Patrice Lumumba and Gamal Abdel Nasser to
wait a minute. Are they actually
succeed? Are
they saying that they want to imitate Europe?
They're definitely not saying they want to imitate Europe, but they all have that. Well, there's obviously exceptions, like Qasim in Iraq was an outright communist. He gained power in 58, and then we overthrew him in a coup in 63.
I guess my question is, how much are they actually moved by, communist states and what they're doing as opposed to what Europe is doing?
Oh, definitely. So, like for example, Gamal Abdel Nasser hated communism, and that's one of the reasons why he annexes Syria in 58 is he's trying to prevent that. He wanted to do what Central Europe and Western Europe was doing. But the problem is if that spread and was successful, like, Nehru was doing the same thing in India.
Yeah.
If you pull this off across the third world, it would have meant a massive amount of state regulation on US businesses trying to plunder and loot and pillage. And we couldn't allow that. We needed to make sure that these states were compliant with the new empire that we were creating to replace the British Empire, which was one of corporate plundering. And if you look, the states that we try to destroy, right? Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, those are the states that have completely rejected and refused to enter into the system that the United States wants. The states that have all joined. They're all on board.
With a lot of like sort of soft power and penalties for those that are not on board with this international world order, right? Like you have all these other tools like sanctions and refusal of like IMF participation, things. Right, you have all these giant tools that look like they're independent, objective bodies like the IMF, like the World Bank. That sound mysterious, right? It's not like I vote for the director of the IMF or I vote for the director of the World Bank. It's not a democratic institution that's operating here on this global level, but it still has this outsized kind of influence on how these countries are able to operate in the scope of the sovereignty that they have.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point. There's basically the United States has used three tools to sort of promote this empire. One is the soft tools that you're talking about here, where if you play, we'll reward you, and if you don't play, we'll sanction you. We won't give you loans.
That's right.
Another thing is war. The United States has made it very clear that if you step out of line, you could get bombed. Like, for example, Iraq is the first state on earth to stop using petrodollars, right, and switched over to the euro to do oil transactions. And then the very next year, because they did it in 2002, the very next year we're invading Iraq. I mean, we made it very clear we will not let you, if we can stop you anyway, from switching over to the euro. The Russians have switched over to the euro and we didn't do anything about it. Iran and Venezuela switched over to the euro.
Didn't know that.
But the problem with war is, as a general rule, war is awful for the economy. The Vietnam War tore up the U.S. economy. The U.S. there's this stupid myth that Americans with 2-digit IQs run around saying, which is war is good for economies. Oh my God, dude! There's one war in human history that was true for. All the other wars have been the exact opposite. They've been catastrophic. World War II is the only war you can point to and go, "Wow, that was really good for the economy."
For the U.S. economy.
Well, okay.
I mean, that's all that matters, obviously. Yes.
But 65 million people died, so there was a little bit of a price tag for that.
Not really.
That great economy.
Yeah, not really.
So. The third tool was the CIA. we will try to overthrow your government. And I have a number. We have attempted 66 coups d'etats since 1947, and we have succeeded 26 times.
How many countries are there? How many sovereign nations are there?
I think the UN says there's 196 states.
Oh, I was going to say 152, but yeah, okay.
So about a third, almost a third.
We've attempted we've attempted a third, but
several times.
Some states get it multiple times. So it's a little.
Iraq is one of them, right? Iraq.
Well, so in the case of Iraq, we definitely participated in the coup in '58, which took out King Faisal. And then the guy that we helped get into power, a communist, by the way, we and the Soviets were both getting Qasim into power. Once we got him into power, he was in power 5 years before we did a coup to get rid of him. So and it was the Baathists that we helped get into power when Qasim was killed. And amazingly enough, the CIA gave Saddam Hussein a list of communists that we didn't want. And Saddam Hussein then basically became an agent of the CIA and went around murdering Iraqis that we disliked.
And the same thing happened with the CIA and the Shah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So give me. Should we go to that story? Like, why was the embassy a particular target? What happened with the middle schoolers? All of this good stuff.
Yeah.
Are we talking about Iran?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean the embassy as far as 1979? The revolution itself?
Yeah. So right from an American perspective, we see this as this terrible atrocity. They attack the embassy. It's an attack on American values and democracy and freedom and women's liberation and all this whatever the fuck. In actuality, the embassy was this particular site of focus.
It was the den of
because
spies.
It was,
That's what it was called.
Because of the base of operations for the CIA operations across all of Asia.
It was for all of Asia.
There is a 54-volume compendium of documents that the CIA operatives were not able to shred or burn before the embassy
or they did shred, but they were put back together.
Well, yeah, that's right. They were put back together. Thank you. Some of them, yes, they were put back together. And this has become and this is, you would go to, for a while in the late 1990s, when I was going to Iran, I was interviewing all these big wigs, and invariably in the bookcases behind them you would see this 54 volume and it was basically all of the communiques with Washington and all the plans. And sure enough, that's what it was. That's what embassies do. Like, it's an understood thing. Like, I don't understand there's no point in arguing this. I mean, it's an understood thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's an understood thing for the proportion of the world that has, suffered at the hands of this particular system. I don't know. It's not an understood thing in the United States, is it?
I don't. I think it's pretty much well understood that embassies are there for diplomacy, but also for gathering information and doing
maybe amongst intellectuals,
our
but I doubt
country's
very
bidding.
much.
I was just going to say that.
But may I add, I want to add something, that if you tell someone who is naive about this, if you actually go to them and say, well, but the United States embassy, just like any other embassy, does this, they would be okay with it. They'd be like, oh, well, that's part of just
I don't think that excuse me, I don't think there's a lot of Americans who understand that an embassy is actually considered part of that country. Like you get into an American embassy and nobody can come in and take you out. You are essentially on American soil,
right?
In that embassy,
right?
And so people, I don't think people know what an embassy is, and I really don't. I think there are a lot of people who do. But my point is, even
if you tell them that part of the role of an embassy is, spying. You're normal American would be like, okay, like,
Sure.
I mean, that's a good thing, even if yeah, like, at any rate. So yeah, so what was specifically your question, Ramesh, about?
I was just asking if we wanted to go there, and we went there, and
we went there,
but we
went there.
didn't quite go there. So
tell me about the middle schoolers.
You wanted
do we want to go way back,
1950?
Like, yeah, 1950. Yeah,
I mean, it's a classic example of the CIA overthrow.
Yeah, so in the early 1950s, there was this movement that started in the late 40s, and the parliament in Iran was becoming stronger. Parliamentarians were becoming stronger. The democracy movement in Iran was becoming stronger. More and more Iranians were going to universities. The university system was growing. Iran was becoming part of this new liberation movement that was taking the third world by storm. And and the center of all of this was the National Iranian Oil Company, which belonged for the most part to British Petroleum.
Imagine that.
So this was
Iran wasn't directly conquered.
Iran was never, well, except for
during World War
II, it was conquered. But then when the Russians and the English left, the Russians said bye, but the English kind of took over. And the way that they took over was through oil. And one of the ways Roy was talking about imperialism, British imperialism, of course, yes, they would come on the ground and then they would sort of build infrastructure. And in the Middle East, they did this a lot. They built the oil extraction infrastructure. And then they were like, okay, this means that we're going to own this and we're going to give you 10%, but we're going to take 90. Yeah, so that was what was going on. And then up in the ranks, there was this up and coming sort of democratic movement star called Mohammad Mossadegh. And my uncles were going to school at the same time in college. And pretty much if you were anybody, if you were a youngster in university, you were a supporter of this man. And a national movement started to throw the English out and nationalize the Iranian oil. And Mossadegh's sort of his rallying cry became, sort of, because of this anti-imperialist and democratic movement cry became, we want to nationalize Iranian oil. And he did it. He did it in Parliament. And that really freaked the English out. And it's a long story, but the Americans stepped in, and the way that they...
This is my cue. I'm jumping in now.
Yeah.
So what happened was, before Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and made it the National Iranian Oil Company, what he did was he threw out the British embassy.
Yes.
And the reason he did that is because in 1905, 1906, when Iran attempted to go democratic the first time, the British spies in Iran helped overthrow their democracy. Russian invasion.
And may I note that at each of those two moments and throughout Iranian history since the 1800s, the kings, it used to be a monarchy, the kings were all basically bought by these imperialist powers, whether they were Russian or they were English at that point, and starting at this point, the Americans.
And then so what happens is the British actually come to Harry S. Truman and they go, hey, we need help in Iran because our embassy's shut down, so we need you guys to do the overthrow. And Truman said no. His actual words were, we're not in the habit of overthrowing governments, but as I just pointed out, in 1949, he just did it. So I don't know what was going through Truman's mind. Was he a liar, a hypocrite? He forgot. He was busy.
He forgot.
He forgot, you know.
He was tired.
He was tired. So what what ends up happening is in the 1952 election, the British approach Eisenhower and they go, look, when you become president, will you help us? And he's like, yeah, I mean, it's a done deal. I'm going to win this November election. So once I'm in, I will do it. And he released Kermit Roosevelt, who is, there was actually a trio. There was the two Roosevelt brothers and Miles Copeland. And Kermit Roosevelt then goes and he gets members of the Iranian military. So it's 1953 to overthrow Mossadegh.
Wait. So it's not quite the military. What happens is that he hires a bunch of thugs.
No, you're skipping a step.
Okay.
The thugs come later. That's his set backup plan.
Is it?
Yeah. So he gets members of the military. They go and they knock on Mossadegh's door at like 3 a.m. And Kermit Roosevelt, who's by the way the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. So
it's almost like we're not a meritocracy.
Yeah, it's almost like we have nobility with fixed positions and titles that get passed down hereditarily. He's actually over in the bushes watching from a distance.
Who is?
Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA operative. And the police knock on Mossadegh's door and they go, okay, we're here to arrest you. And he goes, no, I'm arresting you. And all these men jump out of the bushes and arrest the coup leaders because Mossadegh.
Oh my God, I love this story. This is awesome.
Yeah. And now Roosevelt is recalled. Eisenhower goes, nope, I'm calling off the operation. This went sideways. And so Roosevelt decides, no, I will never be defeated. This is going to happen. And so he goes into hiding and he meets with Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., not the general, but the general's dad.
Okay.
Who was a businessman who operated in Iraq and Iran. And he says, hey, what do I need to do? And that's when he comes up with it's actually Norman Schwarzkopf Sr.'s idea to use the thugs.
So basically they hire a bunch of thugs, and it wasn't very many. It was like some hundreds, like 200-300, something like that. And they start, and they also get help from the clerics. So they start they basically buy a bunch of idiots and start a rally, and that did it.
That did it. They what they would do is they would go through the streets breaking things, chanting "We love Mossadegh," and then Mossadegh would be like, "Stop! If you love me, why are you doing this?" And it destabilizes government.
Yeah. It also reminds us of some other thing that happened keeps happening in the U.S. Yeah.
Do tell.
Yeah.
And so, just to take things in a weird step. So we wanted to get rid of Nasser, the president of Egypt. We just couldn't figure out how to do it. Finally, what we came up with was, why don't we befriend him through the CIA? So Nasser was working with the Russians, but a CIA operative actually went and hooked up with him and became friends. His name was Miles Copeland, as in the guy in the Syria overthrow. And so Nasser and him actually had this really casual, they would talk about operations. Miles Copeland ends up in an interview.
I just want to say something. There is a reason why the third world and folks who come to the US from the third world don't trust white folks.
People who don't come from minorities who are born here don't trust white folks. Gay people don't trust white folks, even if we're, but and nor should they, quite frankly.
I'm just shocked women trust white folks. I
don't.
I think women shouldn't trust white folks.
All right, let's just say it's white men. Fine.
It's white men, 100%. Sorry, I'm done with it.
Come on, white women do their bidding.
Yeah,
that's
also.
Yeah.
They voted Trump in.
They did. They voted for him twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
women voted for Trump.
They'll vote for him in 2024 too.
Yeah, they will. I'm gearing up. I'm thinking of buying a rail car and burying it in my backyard because I don't think the United States survives another 4 years of Trump.
No way.
No
way.
So
sounds like the Democrats better get on it then.
I want to do one more thing about Miles Copeland, just because he's come up so much. First of all, his son was in the band The Police. So I need to
Get the hell out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was he English?
So weird.
The police.
Get the hell out of here.
The police.
I think it's Stuart Copeland, because there's a Miles Copeland Jr. too.
I think it was Stuart who was in the band.
Stuart Copeland, I think, was the son that was in The Police. Anyway, so Miles Copeland did an interview where he admits that the CIA was running around overthrowing all these governments.
I feel like this show's about Miles Copeland.
Yeah, it really is. And the interviewer asks him point blank, didn't you hurt the world by doing this? And Copeland won't say it. He says, no, these things needed to happen. And this is the point that I was making about the CIA has drunk the Kool-Aid. These are believers. They are people who really, honest to God, think they're making the world a better place.
By believing in the supremacy of the white man's rule and intellect and all of that. Yeah.
There is this national fascist myth that white Americans hold on to, that the British who did Brexit hold on to, that the Hungarians and the Poles who have gone fascist hold on to.
It's called white supremacy.
That somehow
White
there
male
is something,
supremacy.
And here's my final thing about this. When the Iraq War was happening in 2003, I had a friend who was a liberal who was against the war. The war happened, and his immediate response after it had taken place was, okay, I was against the war, but now that it's on, we need to do our best to make Iraq better. And it's like, oh, there it is. White supremacy. You can't make it better with your 230-year-old civilization.
But may I just say, there is nothing in this regime of white supremacy and in this larger kind of construct, it is impossible for white folks to believe there is anything they can learn from anyone who is not white.
That's right.
There is no cultural value. There is no value in any other culture that they can.
I think this
it's because they're Bedouins on camels in the desert, right? And the camel's not even standing up yet.
And even if they're not, we're gonna make him that way.
We can shoot that camel in the ass with a missile.
Yes.
It's true though, and I think that's why this show is particularly important, honestly. Because it's culturally diverse when we talk, and I am happy to play the white person because I am the white person, and I agree.
I'm half white.
Susie, I gotta tell you, we have all drank that white supremacy Kool-Aid. I carry it within me.
I'm actually genetically half.
No, but we all carry that. I am constantly having to counter my own bullshit beliefs. When they come up, I'm like,
it's like unlearning. Right. And that's
unlearning.
Really hard. You know, when you have a habit where you always put your keys in the same place and then you start.
She doesn't know that, by the way.
Okay, but just a regular.
Doesn't know what.
Just a general habit. You know, it's just a general
divergent mind. I'm sorry, and it's always working. It always has to do new things.
It's organized chaos. It's organized
I'm divergent.
I'm divergent. I can't find my keys. Yeah, but
it's my new thing. I'm like, anybody says, why can't you focus? I'm divergent.
I like that. I'm constantly in a liminal space myself.
That's funny.
Okay. I want to zoom back in on something, Banafsha, you said earlier to sort of wrap us up and take us home. You earlier said that these patterns of the thugs being hired and going through the streets or whatever else seemed familiar to you or something like this, right? And I think I want to close out by saying that the same sort of patterns and modes of control and propaganda efforts and things like this that we engage in internationally and develop and really get a good handle on in this international space eventually do come home to roost and to rest, right? And the similar tactics of control of control the direction of like political movements, things like this or whatever, end up happening in this country as well. And hopefully we can do an episode on that someday as well.
Well, thank you for saying that, Ramesh. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna say that I'm an immigrant, so maybe I don't have a place saying this, but at least through my studies, I've come to notice that everything that the United States, as sort of tactics, strategies, policies, whatever it's done abroad, it perfected here on the indigenous people and then on the enslaved folks by bringing them over and keeping them in their place. Yeah,
If we don't have somebody
they
to-
have not
to
been able to do
oppress-
it. May I just add that as far as the life force, as far as the intellectual sort of blood of this country, what we see are first Black folks that give this place a soul. So they have not succeeded in any freaking way, if anything. Oh, look at that. Look at that baby in the picture. But yeah, whatever methods they took across the waters, they perfected here. And that mindset, that white supremacist mindset, perfected. They donned that. Ooh, they donned whatever cloth they had going here, and then they took it everywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're like a virus.
And for the record, you've been a citizen now for 18 years, and I think you qualify
Don't
now.
qualify. Yeah, don't do that. You're an American.
Just as much as anybody else.
To the fact that I am not the person who should be talking about this, and perhaps Roy Peace needs to, or if he wanted to. But I also wanted to say something else, and then my divergent brain forgot.
I think after you learn like Cherokee or Ojibwa or Menominee or Potawatomi or something, then we can have a different conversation. But as long as we're talking in English, I think everything's bullshit.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
yeah. You are an American. If you're proud to be American, which I am, I'm a proud American.
I'm not even a proud human these days, let me tell you.
I hear you. I think collectively we are bad, but I think there are some of us who are really trying. And again, I do think we're a virus to this earth. I think we're parasites.
Oh, this is what I was going to say. I was going to say something. And what I was going to say is a lot of when discussions happen around white supremacy, and I'd love to have a conversation about this, a lot of folks take this to a DNA. Their minds go straight to, well, there must be something wrong with white DNA. Is that what you're talking about? And I have to say, racialization has happened for Black and brown folks, but it has also happened for white folks.
Yeah.
This is all a construct. And whatever thing I said white folks dawned on, that was a dawning. It was a choice at some point by some folks. And now we have all stepped into that shit, literally. Yep. So this has nothing to do with
the virus. Yeah.
The makeup of the human system.
And once the Chinese take over, we'll be talking about Chinese supremacy, because they'll just impose their system. Yeah. So and my own personal experience is if the Turks and the Persians were in this position. So it's not a genetic thing. It is just
power. So the virus is not the human, it's the ideology.
Yeah, it's like the study they do, right? With I'm sorry. No, I was gonna say it's like that study they do where they have like the prison guards or whatever, and then it's like the people, it's like the whole like people with power
the Stanford project or whatever.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's like that.
Yeah. It is.
But I do have to say, I think it has a lot to do with cultural traits too.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
In the sense that Europeans, when they started the whole enslavement of humans as a trade, because their cultural, especially their financial system, capitalism, gave them an okay about it. Like there was a shift. There was a cultural shift in values.
Yeah.
And I mean, that really didn't happen in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everywhere else, communalism was still more important than individualism. And that shift for the Europeans really fucked them up and fucked the rest of us up too.
Yeah.
Humans are not the virus. The ideology of the virus. And with the Stanford prison experiment, it was a bunch of white boys who had competed well enough to get into Stanford that were there and were put into a position of a prison, a model of a prison.
Exactly. It'd be interesting if it was a different group of people in there, what would have happened.
Absolutely.
We recently saw a film. What the heck was this film that what was the name of this film? Anyway, it was like this comet that's hitting the earth.
Oh, Greenland,
right?
Oh,
and for the first time ever, I noticed that they were making realistic choices for who was actually coming to the aid of others and who was being self-centered.
Wow.
For the first time ever, it was folks who believe in communal sort of living and values, which are the Black and brown folks for the most part. And the folks who are reared to be self-centered, and which are the white folks. I mean, it's a cultural thing. It has nothing to do with DNA. It is.
And also it's worth pointing out, I think, that when you don't have a sense of community, you have to fill that void, because community creates rules on how you interact. And you have to fill that void with rules because you don't have the rules.
Made a really good,
And so structurally what ends up happening is people who are so individualistic end up being these rigid rules followers who think, oh my God, no, this is the law, this is the rule. And they have no space for the human exceptions that pop up along the way. And then now we've computerized everything and made it even worse.
Yeah.
Or it was the white women. That doctor was, remember that doctor? There was one white woman who broke the rules, and it was a woman who did it. Yeah, it always ends.
There was a group of.
We have this piñata called the white man. We just keep beating on him.
Well, just like we have the government we deserve.
It's true. It's true. That's true. Oh, by the way, before we leave.
Oh. Ooh.
I just want to.
Yeah, with the recognition that there is no better closing note than the one Susie just presented. Let's head out.
Wait,
oh no,
Rory's got can I miss one thing? Yes. So today begins it's a week-long virtual protest that's going on by the Amazon workers at the Bessemer warehouse in Alabama. They're going to be voting to unionize pretty soon. And, Amazon has a history of union busting. So they're asking folks not to use Amazon's website, Prime, or the Alexa products for the rest of the week till Saturday. And if you want to find more about that, go to ucomblog.com. That's the letter U, COMM blog.com. So
cool.
Don't cross that picket line.
Don't cross that picket line. Yeah.
These people are peeing in bottles. Don't do it.
That's right. They're having to work with the COVID conditions, and you know what I mean. They're not taking it as serious at Amazon warehouses. So it's pretty something to stand in solidarity with. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't be a scab.
Mm-hmm.
What is this guy?
Person that crosses the picket line.
Really? Is that what the word for it is?
That's what they're called.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that either.
Because when the people strike, they have people who come in and cover it up like a scab.
Yeah. To all of those who are on this side of the picket line, a good week to you. We'll see you next week, next Sunday, all of that. And yeah, take care until then.
Yeah, stay happy and healthy.
Yay! Okay, I'm assuming Roy just stopped that.